Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. My guest for this series is Dr. Sarah Elaine Eaton. Sarah is the editor of a new book series from Springer Nature called Ethics and Integrity in Educational Contexts. Her first volume, Academic Integrity in Canada, which she co-edited with Julia Christensen Hughes, is out now. She's also the editor-in-chief of the International Journal for Educational Integrity and a faculty member at the Werklund School of Education at the University of Calgary. Now, you might hear educational ethics and integrity and think, yeah, we need some of that, or where do we even start? But we're actually talking about a field of study, one that is multidisciplinary and has lately extended quite far beyond its traditional and more narrow academic integrity days. And that's what Sarah is here to talk about. We'll be looking at how the field of study has advanced to include global perspectives on not just student behavior, but instruction, academic leadership, technology, and, importantly, equity. This 4-part series is brought to you with support from Springer Nature. In this first episode, we'll start by introducing you to Sarah and defining the field of educational ethics and how closely it relates to educational practices. Okay, Sarah, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So let's start with a little bit about your background. Can you tell us where you're currently teaching and your research as well into educational integrity?
Yeah, I work at the University of Calgary in Canada, and I have 2 roles there. I'm an associate professor in the Werklund School of Education in the area of leadership, policy, and governance. And I also have a secondment to the Taylor Institute for Teaching and Learning, where I serve as the inaugural educational leader in residence for academic integrity, which dovetails really nicely with my research interests that focus on academic integrity and ethics, specifically in higher education.
And is this something you've been doing for a while, or how did you sort of get into educational ethics?
Great question. A now retired vice provost of teaching and learning asked me to join her on a research project several years ago before she retired around academic integrity in Canada. And as we were doing that research, I really recognized that not many people had been doing this research in Canada. And it was a pivotal moment for me in my career because it changed the trajectory of my research. And I really began to focus more on academic integrity and educational ethics. And it's been a wonderful area to research, not only focusing on Canada, but also on global issues.
Excellent. Yeah. So can you help us understand what educational ethics and integrity is? It sounds obvious, but it encompasses some very specific things. Can you talk about that, and can you talk about it also as a field of study in and of itself?
Yeah, educational ethics is often compared with academic integrity. The term educational ethics is used more in Australia and New Zealand than it is in North America, but it's widely seen as being an area or a subset related to academic ethics around acting with integrity. So the International Center for Academic Integrity sort of has 6 foundational values that they say should drive decision-making in our learning organizations. And those are courage, fairness, honesty, respect, responsibility, and trust. And these are the foundations for ethical decision-making, not only among our student body, but also among our educators, administrators, staff, and everyone associated with our learning institutions and communities. And as a field of study, this has been around since, I have research articles going back to the 1800s on topics related to plagiarism or cheating.
Mm-hmm. And then as a field of study, it's been around a long time, but in terms of, sort of codified practices, so to speak, is it been around at least as long as that, or did that emerge later on as something like in a more organized fashion?
Yeah, the person to really launch this as a field of study was Bill Bowers in the 1960s, and he worked in New York and did the first large-scale surveys around plagiarism and cheating in American colleges and universities, and that really sort of launched the field, and then it took off later with the work of Don McCabe, who was a co-founder of what's now the International Center for Academic Integrity. McCabe also did large-scale surveys, not only in the US, but also in Canada and other countries. And even to date, it's the largest data set that's ever been collected anywhere in the world. I think by the end of his career, he had over 100,000 survey responses and really solidified this as a field of study. And now not only is there quantitative research, but also qualitative, interpretive, all kinds of different studies into a variety of topics related to academic integrity.
Okay. Earlier, you mentioned Australia and New Zealand as sort of centers for these practices. Is that sort of where the field emerged originally, or why are they sort of, I guess, more active, I suppose, in this field?
Yeah, no, I love this question. I think although academic integrity really launched as a field of research in the United States, it was
Mm,
catalyzed by the Australians in particular, right? And the work of Tracy Bertagg, who launched the International Journal for Educational Integrity back in 2005. And interestingly, Australia has been one of the first and only countries to fund large scale research. So they have government grants there for research, which
nice.
doesn't exist as much in other countries. So it really allowed them to catalyze and advance this field in amazing ways over the past 20 years.
Hmm. What do you suppose sort of allowed them to do that? I mean, it seems like that would require a lot of sort of consensus around that field of study, that might make it easier for them to, organize around it,
Mhm.
than perhaps other parts of the world.
Yeah, it's well. In addition to having a couple of key researchers, so one of them, as I mentioned, was Tracy Bertagg. They also had media scandals
Hmm.
around students buying their academic work online with a particular company that was identified by the mainstream media was called My Master, and this was a service that provided assignment completion for service for students, and they could order their assignments to be completed for this online service. And then the Australian mainstream media found it and found that this was not an isolated incident; that there were dozens, if not hundreds, of students buying their assignments from different universities across the country from just one company. And
Hmm.
I mean, in the olden days, we would have called them term paper mills or essay mills. Now we call it contract cheating. But then when this became seen as a problem that was extending across Australia and they couldn't just pin it to one university, then the Australian higher education organizations and the quality assurance organizations and the governments really perked up and said, hey, we've got a problem. We have to address this. And they really put their money where their mouth is. And they put
Hmm.
research funding behind it. They put funding for advocacy, education, and so forth behind it. And I think it was actually the media scandal that really opened people's eyes to the extent that this topic deserves attention.
Yeah, yeah. Likewise here in the States too, more recently with the admission scandals and so on. So you've got an editorial leadership role in two major areas of publication. You're the editor of Springer Nature's new book series, Ethics and Integrity in Educational Contexts, and you're also the editor in chief of the International Journal for Educational Integrity. Can you give us a short background on each of those and how they're supporting the field?
Sure, I'll start chronologically. So, the International Journal for Educational Integrity was launched in 2005 by Tracy Bertagg, who has been a mentor for many of us who work in this field. And sadly, she found out that she was terminally ill in 2020, asked me to join her as a co editor at that time. And then I took on the full editorship of the journal in 2021. So I'm just coming to the end of my first year of being the editor in chief of the International Journal for Educational Integrity. And it's an exciting journal, multidisciplinary. We publish research from a variety of different methodological backgrounds and academic areas, all focused, of course, on ethics and integrity in educational context from around the world. So, in addition to that, I also saw a need that, in addition to the journal, that there was need for full-length books on topics related to this, as well as edited volumes. And so, we launched the book series earlier this year. The first book is Academic Integrity in Canada. I just actually received the final proofs recently, and the book should be forthcoming, which is pretty exciting because it'll be the first book on academic integrity in my country, which is providing the anchor for the series. And we have a couple of other books lined up in that series. We have editors or authors with books related to ethics in teacher preparation, teacher training, and also fake credentials. So we're pretty excited about the need for this series in the field and the way that this can help advance knowledge in the field.
Hmm. Excellent. So you mentioned sort of the multidisciplinary aspect of this. What are sort of what's the intersection there of those disciplines? Which ones are tend to be involved?
Well, I mean, if we're teaching in higher education, there's no discipline that's not affected by academic integrity issues in some
Right.
way. And I think, my background is in humanities and later social sciences. So often people in humanities will start out by studying plagiarism, and then we might move into other areas. But it was actually two computer scientists in the United Kingdom, Bob Clark and Thomas Lancaster, who coined the term contract cheating because they found their students outsourcing their assignments to an outfit in the UK called Rent-A-Coder. And they said to the rest of the field, hey, the term paper mills doesn't work for us because we're in a non-text based discipline. So we need a term that will work for anybody in any discipline. Now contract cheating is the preferred term around the world. And so that was brought in by computer scientists. But I have colleagues who work in social sciences, humanities, the hard sciences, engineering, basic and even medical sciences and health sciences as well. For folks who teach, we encounter issues related to academic integrity. So this really spans every discipline.
Mm-hmm. And then likewise, would the audience, someone who would read your journal or buy one of these books, also be any one of those folks in terms of teaching faculty or administrators or anyone developing policy or rules around this, basically?
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Yeah.
when I think about the audience for, say, our academic integrity in Canada book, we're targeting not only educators, but also administrators, researchers, graduate students, policymakers. In our book, we're pretty excited because, as you know, Canada is a bilingual country. So we have contributors, everybody's writing in English, but we have contributors who are from our province of Quebec. So their first language is French. We have contributors from Indigenous backgrounds, which is important for us in Canada. So we're speaking about topics that are addressed across the globe, but with a localized flavor, which I think will help advance the field for us, but also in other countries. So, for example, even though Australia and New Zealand, I said, have been leading the field for 15 years, we haven't seen a lot from them in terms of Indigenous perspectives on academic integrity. And what does that look like? And how can we push the boundaries of knowledge in this field through some of these publications? We do the same thing with the journal. We have sort of new and fresh and exciting topics, and we try not to do just the same old every issue.
Excellent. Okay. So here's a hypothetical for you. Let's say an institution finds students plagiarizing, abusing AI technology, or contract cheating. Does this issue call for an anti-cheating campaign, or can it be an opportunity to reevaluate teaching styles and curricula? In other words, like, how closely does this field relate to educational practices? Where does it see the root of unethical educational behavior?
Largely, this is a field of applied research. So we relate everything we're doing pretty much either to policy or to teaching and learning or to student conduct in one way or another, or faculty conduct, depending on the context.
Right.
So lots of schools have anti-cheating campaigns. So the International Center for Academic Integrity has a day of awareness, day of action around contract cheating. It typically happens in the third week of October. It aligns with Global Ethics Day. And many schools around the world have built an academic integrity week around that. We did that at our school. We also encouraged others across Canada to do that. We have colleagues in Europe who do it. So now, the third week of October at many schools is Academic Integrity Week. And we've already identified that for 2022, that will be October 17th to 21st. And schools are already preparing for their Academic Integrity Week in 2022. And this is in addition to any orientation tutorials that might happen. We don't really see academic integrity education as being a one and done approach, but rather that students need opportunities to engage in an ongoing basis and an iterative basis to practice skills, ask questions in a safe space, and then build their understanding not only of sort of the theory of ethical decision making, but what does that look like in practice in everyday life, as well as in the classroom.
Excellent. You just heard from Dr. Sarah Elaine Eaton. Sarah is the editor of a new book series from Springer Nature called Ethics and Integrity in Educational Contexts. Her first volume, Academic Integrity in Canada, which she co-edited with Julia Christensen Hughes, is out now. She's also the editor-in-chief of the International Journal for Educational Integrity and a faculty member at the Workland School of Education at the University of Calgary. Join us next week when we'll talk about how the field is evolving beyond student-focused areas of research, how initiatives related to important social programs like DEI fit in, and how this area is informing practice, advocacy, and policy. This 4-part series is brought to you with support from Springer Nature.
So there has been some research that's come out of the United States and the UK in particular that shows that Black students in particular are reported more often than their white peers for academic misconduct. So I should clarify that being reported and actually committing an act of misconduct are not the same thing. And so when we get these institutional reports of this many incidences of plagiarism, we also need to dig into those numbers and question how many cases were not reported and who gets forgiven without ever being reported.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.